Good evening, and welcome to Sleep Sanctuary, where calmness and imagination meet to guide you into a restful sleep. Tonight, let us embark on a journey into the tranquil embrace of a hidden meadow. Close your eyes, if you wish, and imagine a world far removed from the noise and rush of the day. Feel the gentle pull of stillness, like a soft melody calling you to a place where the air is crisp, the stars are endless, and the grass whispers tales of long-forgotten moments. Let the quiet of the night cradle you, guiding you to a sanctuary of peace. The story begins on a sleepless night, one of those rare moments when the restlessness within mirrors the stillness outside. The moon hung low, casting a silvery glow across the world. I felt it then, a tug, faint yet undeniable, pulling me from the comfort of home and into the cool embrace of the night. With no clear destination, I wandered, my steps guided by instinct alone, until the dense woods opened up into a clearing unlike anything I had ever seen. The meadow stretched endlessly before me, bathed in soft moonlight that turned each blade of grass into a shimmering thread. The wind moved gently, but it wasn't just the rustling of grass I heard, it was something more. A hum, low and melodic, drifted through the air, carrying with it the faintest murmur of voices. It was as though the meadow itself was alive, sharing secrets with those willing to listen. I stood at the edge, hesitant yet captivated. The hum seemed to call to me, weaving a lullaby that spoke not to my ears, but to something deeper within, a part of me that longed for calm. Slowly, I walked forward, each step feeling lighter, as if the weight of the world was slipping away with every whisper that reached me. Settling onto the soft grass, I closed my eyes and listened. The whispers became clearer, each voice distinct yet blending into a symphony. They spoke of love, of moments of kindness, of courage in the face of fear. I sat there, motionless, as the meadow's secrets began to unfold, feeling as though I was not just hearing stories, but becoming a part of them. And so, my journey into the whispering meadow began. Take a deep breath. Let the weight of the day fall away, like leaves drifting from a tree in the quiet of autumn. Tonight, this is your moment to pause, to find peace, and to simply be. Imagine yourself stepping into a meadow illuminated by soft moonlight, where the air is crisp and the world feels still. Feel the cool grass beneath you as you settle into this tranquil space. As you breathe in, let the air fill your lungs with a sense of calm. Hold it for just a moment, then exhale slowly, releasing any tension you carry. With each breath, feel yourself sink deeper into a state of rest. Picture the stars above twinkling faintly, as if they, too, are whispering their own quiet stories. The gentle breeze brushes against your skin, soothing and light, as though the night itself is wrapping you in its embrace. The sound of the whispering grass surrounds you, soft and melodic. There's no need to focus on the words, simply let the rhythm of the meadow guide you into relaxation. The voices rise and fall, like waves lapping gently at the shore, carrying you further away from the busyness of your thoughts. In this moment, you are weightless, unburdened, and entirely at ease. Let yourself remain here for as long as you like. With every breath, feel the quiet strength of the meadow holding you, grounding you, and allowing you to rest. This is a place of peace, and it is yours whenever you need it. When you are ready, let your breathing return to its natural rhythm. Know that the stories of the meadow will wait for you, ready to reveal their secrets when the time is right. For now, simply rest. The whispers began as a soft hum, carried on the breeze, rising and falling like a distant lullaby. At first, it was hard to distinguish their source. The gentle rustling of the grass mingled with the sounds, creating a symphony so subtle that it felt more like a sensation than a sound. But as I sat quietly, surrendering to the stillness of the meadow, the whispers grew clearer, distinct voices emerging from the harmony. Each voice told a story, fragments of lives that had once been and perhaps still were. Some were soft and filled with warmth, speaking of love that had flourished even in the harshest of times. Others were urgent, pulsing with the courage of someone who had stood tall in the face of overwhelming fear. And then there were the gentle, bittersweet tones, tales of kindness extended to a stranger, often unnoticed, yet rippling outward like waves across a still pond. I listened, my breath slow and steady, as one whisper grew louder, drawing my attention. It was a tale of selflessness, of love given without hesitation or expectation. A young woman had traveled miles through a blizzard to bring medicine to a sick child in a remote village. I could almost see her, her scarf wrapped tightly around her face, her steps faltering as the snow grew deeper. Despite the danger, she pushed forward, driven by something greater than fear. As the story unfolded, the meadow seemed to transform. I could feel the icy sting of the snow on my skin, hear the crunch of her boots against the frozen ground, and feel her determination as though it were my own. The whispers weren't just words, they were windows into these lives, vivid and alive, painting pictures in my mind with each breath of the wind. The young woman finally reached the village, her hands trembling as she delivered the medicine. The grateful eyes of the family she had saved seemed to glow in the story, a silent testament to the power of her courage. Then, as softly as it had begun, the whisper faded, leaving behind a profound sense of connection. It was as if the meadow itself mourned the passing of such a powerful tale, only to remind me that countless others remained. I sat in silence, my heart full, as the breeze shifted, bringing with it a new hum, a new voice. This time, it spoke of an act of kindness, a simple gesture of compassion that had altered the course of someone's life. The voices were different, yet their message was the same: no act of love or courage, however small, is ever lost. They live on, carried by the wind, whispered into the hearts of those willing to listen. For hours, or perhaps minutes, time seemed to blur. I listened to the meadow's voices. each story wrapped around me like a soft blanket, carrying me deeper into its embrace. It was more than hearing, it was feeling, understanding, and remembering. I realized that these stories were not just for me, they were for everyone. Whispers from the past reminding us of the beauty and strength we all hold within. The meadow grew quieter then, as if it, too, needed to rest. The whispers softened, their cadence slowing, leaving me in a cocoon of stillness. Yet, even in the silence, I could still feel their presence, a quiet hum beneath the surface, ready to rise again when the wind called them forth. I lay back in the grass, gazing at the stars. The meadow's whispers had stirred something deep within me, a quiet longing to not only hear these tales, but to carry their spirit forward. And as I closed my eyes, the hum of the meadow stayed with me, soft and steady, a reminder that every whisper carries a piece of us all. The whispers returned, soft at first, like the distant echo of a melody carried on the breeze. I closed my eyes again, letting the meadow guide me into its stories. This time, the voices carried a tale that felt different, bolder, charged with the weight of fear and the brilliance of resilience. The words sharpened, the whispers growing clearer, and I found myself immersed in a story that seemed to unfold before my very eyes. It was the tale of a young boy named Elias, living in a small mountainside village surrounded by jagged cliffs and roaring winds. The whispers described his world so vividly that I could almost feel the chill of the mountain air and the rough stone paths beneath my feet. Elias was quiet by nature, unassuming, yet there was a fire in his heart, a courage he didn't yet know he possessed. The village faced a perilous storm, one of the fiercest in years. Torrential rains battered the homes, and landslides threatened to cut off the only path leading to the valley below. The whispers wove the tension in the air, the villagers huddling together, unsure if they could withstand the storm. A shout rang out, a cry for help from the farthest edge of the village. Elias was the first to respond, rushing to the source of the sound. A family was trapped in their crumbling home, the path to safety blocked by heavy debris. While others hesitated, their fear holding them back, Elias pushed forward. The whispers described his movements vividly, the trembling of his hands, the way his breath came in short gasps as he pulled away rocks and broken timber with everything he had. The danger was palpable, the ground beneath him was slick and unstable, and every step risked sending him tumbling down the slope. Yet, he pressed on. When his strength wavered, he looked back at the faces of the family, their silent pleas giving him the courage to keep going. Slowly, painstakingly, he cleared a path, guiding them out of the ruins and into the relative safety of the village square. The whispers seemed to pause here, letting me feel the weight of Elias' courage, his small frame standing strong against a storm that seemed insurmountable. I could feel the raw determination in him, the way his fear became fuel rather than a barrier. The villagers gathered around him, their awe and gratitude radiating through the tail like a warm light breaking through the storm clouds. As the family embraced him, their tears mingling with the rain, Elias stood quietly, his head bowed. He hadn't sought recognition or praise, he had acted simply because it was right. The storm eventually passed, and while the village bore scars of the destruction, they also carried a new story, one of bravery and selflessness. The whispers faded, leaving the image of Elias standing in the rain etched in my mind. His courage felt larger than life, yet the meadow's gentle hum reminded me that such courage exists in all of us. It doesn't always roar, sometimes it is quiet, steady, and unyielding, like a small flame that refuses to be extinguished. I sat there, letting the tale settle within me. It was as though the meadow itself was teaching me, reminding me of the quiet heroes whose stories often go untold. The act of courage may have belonged to Elias, but the ripple it created stretched far beyond him, carried in whispers to those like me who would one day need its strength. As the wind shifted, carrying with it another voice, I realized something profound. These stories weren't just echoes of the past. They were gifts passed on to inspire, to remind, and to awaken the courage within those who heard them. With the hum of the meadow growing softer again, I leaned back and listened, ready for the next whisper. The meadow stirred again, the whispers returning with a gentle persistence, as if the wind itself carried a story it could not keep to itself. The sound was softer this time, delicate and warm, like a lullaby sung from a place of deep compassion. I closed my eyes, letting the whispers draw me in. This story began not with grand gestures or acts of bravery, but with something simpler, quieter, a kindness that, though small, rippled far beyond its moment. The voice spoke of a woman named Clara who lived in a bustling city, her life filled with routine and the hurried pace of modern days. She worked at a small cafe on a busy corner, where faces came and went in a blur of coffee orders and clinking cups. The whispers painted her world vividly, the hum of traffic outside, the warm aroma of freshly brewed coffee, and Clara's quiet presence as she moved through her day. Clara wasn't someone who stood out. She was kind, but not loudly so. She offered smiles to strangers, remembered regulars' names, and always seemed to know when someone needed just a little extra warmth in their day. It was a cold, grey afternoon when her story truly began, a day that might have passed unnoticed by most. A young man entered the cafe, his shoulders hunched and his expression distant. He ordered a small coffee, barely making eye contact, and retreated to a corner table. Something about him caught Clara's attention, not his appearance, but the weight he seemed to carry. She could see it in the way he stirred his coffee absently, his gaze lost somewhere far away. Without hesitation, she made a small gesture. A piece of warm pastry, wrapped gently in a napkin, delivered to his table with a soft smile. "This is on the house," she said, her voice gentle but firm. The young man looked up, startled, and for a moment, his mask of detachment slipped. He thanked her quietly, his voice cracking just slightly. The whispers unfolded the rest of the story like a tender melody. That single act, so simple and unassuming, became a turning point for the young man. Clara didn't know that he had walked into the cafe that day at the edge of despair, feeling invisible and lost. She couldn't have known that her small kindness would remind him that he mattered, that someone had noticed him in a world that often felt cold and indifferent. Over time, he returned to the cafe, his shoulders a little straighter, his gaze a little brighter. He began to talk to Clara, and though their exchanges were brief, they were meaningful. He eventually shared his story with her, how he had been struggling with loneliness and doubt, how her small gesture had sparked something in him, a flicker of hope that had grown stronger with each passing day. The whispers softened, their cadence slowing, as if to emphasize the quiet power of Clara's story. She never sought recognition for what she did, and perhaps she never fully understood the impact of her actions. But her kindness lived on, carried in the heart of the young man who found the strength to keep going. He, in turn, began to offer kindness to others, paying forward the simple act that had once saved him. As the tale faded, the meadow seemed to hum with warmth, as though it, too, celebrated Clara's quiet compassion. I sat still, the story resonating deeply. Kindness, the whispers seemed to say, is not measured by its size but by its sincerity. Even the smallest act, given freely and without expectation, can echo far beyond its moment. The wind shifted again, bringing with it a new murmur, but Clara's story lingered in my heart, a reminder of the profound beauty in life's simplest gestures. The meadow's hum embraced me as I waited for the next tale to unfold.
The whispers returned, soft and insistent, drawing me deeper into their embrace. This time, they felt different, familiar, as if the wind carried not a stranger's tale, but one that had been waiting for me all along. The meadow seemed to sense this too, its hum growing softer, more intimate, like a gentle nudge urging me to listen closely. As the story unfolded, I realized it was not someone else's life being shared. It was mine. The whispers carried me back to a moment I had long forgotten, buried under the layers of time. I was no longer sitting in the meadow, but standing in a small park on a rainy afternoon. I could see myself, younger and distracted, hurrying through the drizzle with little care for the world around me. Ahead of me was an elderly man, struggling to carry a heavy bag of groceries. The rain had soaked him through, and he stopped every few steps to readjust the weight. I could see the frustration and weariness in his movements, but what I remembered most was the quiet dignity in the way he pushed forward. The whispers brought back the exact moment when I noticed him. I hesitated at first, caught up in my own rush, but something, perhaps a nudge from the same wind that carried these whispers, made me stop. I stepped forward and offered to help. I remembered how he looked at me, surprised at first, then grateful. Together, we walked to his small apartment a few blocks away. The bag was heavy, but the weight felt lighter somehow as we talked. He told me about his late wife, his children who lived far away, and the garden he had tended for years. His voice was steady, but I could sense the loneliness beneath it. When we reached his apartment, he thanked me with a sincerity that felt almost too much for such a small act. I smiled, waved, and walked away, thinking little of it at the time. It had been a fleeting moment in my life, a kindness offered and forgotten. But the whispers reminded me of what I had never known. That small gesture had meant more to the man than I could have imagined. In the days that followed, he spoke about it to his neighbors, recounting it as proof that there was still kindness in the world. That simple act of helping had reignited a spark in him, giving him the courage to reach out to others and rebuild connections he had once let fade. The whispers painted the rest of his story for me. He began inviting his neighbors over for tea, planting a garden in the shared courtyard, and bringing a sense of community back to a place that had felt cold and empty. His life blossomed in ways I could never have foreseen, all because of a moment I had dismissed as insignificant. The meadow grew quiet again, leaving me with the weight of the story, the memory of my own kindness, reflected back to me in a way I had never considered. It was humbling, and it filled me with an odd mix of emotions, gratitude, wonder, and a gentle ache for the moments we let slip by without realizing their potential. I sat in the stillness, letting the whispers fade as I reflected on the lesson they had given me. Sometimes, the smallest gestures are the ones that echo the loudest. We may not always see the ripples our actions create, but the meadow reminded me that they exist, carried on the wind, whispered into hearts far beyond our own understanding. The breeze shifted again, its rhythm changing as though readying me for the next tale. But for now, I stayed rooted in the moment, letting the meadow's hum guide me into a deep, peaceful calm, grateful for the memory it had returned to me.
The whispers rose again, softer this time, like the first light of dawn creeping over the horizon. The meadow seemed to hold its breath, as though the story it carried was delicate, one that required my full attention. I let myself sink deeper into the grass, closing my eyes and feeling the warmth of the sun on my face. The meadow knew I was ready. The story began with a young woman named Myra, living in a quiet village nestled between rolling hills. Myra had a gift, a voice that could rival the sweetest birdsong, weaving emotions into melodies so tender they seemed to pull at the soul. But Myra's voice was one the world had never heard. The whispers spoke of her fear, one that grew like a shadow over her heart. Myra was kind and gentle, yet the thought of being seen, of being vulnerable, left her paralyzed. She sang only when she was alone, her songs carried by the wind, but never shared with those who might hear them. Myra's days were filled with ordinary tasks, tending her garden, feeding the animals, and weaving intricate tapestries that hung in her small cottage. The village knew her as the quiet girl with kind eyes, never suspecting the gift she kept hidden. But the whispers described her world with an aching beauty, each note of her hidden songs painting a canvas of emotions she could never voice aloud. One day, a traveling minstrel arrived in the village. He was a man with a weathered lute and a heart full of stories. He performed in the square, his songs filling the air with laughter, tears, and awe. The whispers spoke of Myra's fascination, how she lingered on the edge of the crowd, her heart longing to share her own voice, yet held back by the fear that had bound her for so long. The minstrel noticed her, his eyes warm and curious. He approached her after his performance, his lute slung across his back, and struck up a conversation. His words were light and inviting, but Myra answered only with polite nods and shy smiles. Yet something in his presence stirred a courage she didn't know she had. The whispers carried the moment that changed everything. Late one evening, as the village grew quiet, the minstrel passed by Myra's cottage. Through the open window, he heard the faintest melody, a song so pure, so achingly beautiful, that it stopped him in his tracks. He listened, not wanting to interrupt, until the song ended and the night grew silent again. The next day, he approached Myra once more, but this time he spoke with a gentle certainty. "You have a gift," he said. "A voice the world deserves to hear. Do not let fear keep it hidden." Myra's heart raced, her fear rising like a tide, but the minstrel's words lingered. He didn't press her, only leaving her with a simple promise: "When you are ready, I will be here." The whispers painted Myra's struggle vividly, the night she spent singing to herself, her heart battling between fear and longing. And then, one evening as the village gathered for a celebration, Myra made her choice. With trembling hands and a pounding heart, she stepped onto the small platform where the minstrel played. At first, her voice was soft, barely audible above the murmur of the crowd. But as the melody took shape, something within her shifted. The fear ebbed, replaced by a quiet strength that grew with each note. Her song flowed like a river, carrying with it every emotion she had kept hidden for so long. The whispers described the silence that followed her final note, a silence not of judgment, but of awe. The villagers erupted into applause, their cheers ringing through the night. Myra stood there, her face flushed, her heart full, and for the first time, she felt seen, not just by others, but by herself. As the whispers faded, I sat in the meadow, the weight of Myra's courage resting gently in my chest. Her story wasn't just about singing, it was about finding the strength to step into the light, to be vulnerable, and to share the beauty that fear so often hides. The wind shifted, carrying the promise of one final tale. But for now, I lingered in the warmth of the meadow, letting the courage of Myra's song echo within me. The whispers grew faint, as though the meadow itself was drawing closer to its final breath for the evening. The air felt heavier, but not in an unpleasant way. It was the weight of understanding, of knowing something profound lingered on the horizon. The wind seemed to circle me now, carrying with it remnants of every tale I'd heard. I felt as though I were part of this place, my heart beating in rhythm with the rustling grass. The meadow wasn't just a place of stories, it was a keeper of them, a vessel that carried the echoes of kindness, courage, and connection. And now it seemed ready to share one final secret. The whispers began slowly, almost hesitantly, as if testing my readiness to hear the tale. But it wasn't a story of someone else's life this time. It was about the meadow itself. Long ago, the whispers revealed, this meadow was not hidden. It lay in the heart of a village, its golden grasses swaying under the touch of every passerby. People gathered here, sharing stories by the firelight, their laughter and sorrows carried into the air. The meadow thrived on their voices, weaving their emotions into its very being. But as time passed, the village grew quieter. People drifted away, their lives consumed by other pursuits, their stories left untold. The meadow began to fade, its whispers softening until only the wind remembered its voice. Then, one day, something extraordinary happened. A lone traveler stumbled upon the meadow, weary from their journey. They sat down, letting their thoughts spill into the silence. And the meadow listened. It absorbed every word, every memory, weaving them into the fabric of its grass. The traveler left, unaware they had sparked something profound. The whispers grew stronger, painting an image of countless others who followed. Lost souls, wandering hearts, they came to the meadow, drawn by an invisible pull. They shared their stories, their hopes, their fears. And the meadow listened. It gave each one a place to belong, even if just for a moment, carrying their whispers far and wide so their stories would never be forgotten. I realized then that I, too, had become part of this meadow's legacy. By listening to its whispers, by letting the stories it carried find a place in my heart, I had joined the chain of those who had come before me. The wind stirred again, carrying a final truth. The meadow didn't just listen, it healed. It took the pain, the joy, the courage of every story and turned it into something beautiful, sending it back into the world to inspire others. The whispers weren't merely echoes, they were seeds, planted in the hearts of those willing to listen, waiting to bloom. As the tale came to an end, the meadow grew still. The wind quieted, the grass barely moving, as if it, too, needed a moment to rest. I sat in the silence, my heart full and my mind clear. I understood now why I had been drawn here, why the meadow had chosen to share its whispers with me. I looked out at the horizon, the first stars beginning to dot the sky. A deep peace settled over me, the kind that comes not from answers but from understanding. The meadow didn't need to be seen to exist, didn't need to be known to matter. It simply was a quiet reminder of the power of connection, of the beauty in every story, no matter how small. As I stood to leave, I felt the meadow's embrace one last time. The wind wrapped around me, carrying a message I would hold forever. Rest well, traveler, it seemed to say, its voice as soft as a lullaby. Carry these whispers with you, and may your own story ripple far beyond what you can see. With those words, I walked away, the meadow fading behind me, but remaining alive in my heart. The stars above seemed brighter, their light guiding me back to the world I had left behind.